Support this podcast at patreon.com/Kris Karl Photography Podcast. I've got to start off by saying that you are 100% on my Mount Rushmore of photographers. You're one of the main reasons that I do this as a job. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to do this. Really sincerely, thank you so much. Let's start off with why it is that you picked up a camera in the first place.
Okay. Yeah. So it is always I feel like it's always a bad thing to do things that kind of play up the idea that I'm old. I'm actually not that old. I'm 41. But I go back because I started early enough. I started professionally basically right out of college and even in college. So, and I did I lucked into some really big professional things that started me on my career, like a couple months out of college. So yes, I did technically start back in the days where a film camera was just called a camera. So back before it was literally just picking up a camera. My father was a big camera collector. He just liked buying them. He liked using them. He had several principles that I think are really good in general for at least for non-professionals working in the most exacting fields, which is sort of to buy the second best camera, right? There's such a not the most expensive one because there's a law of diminishing returns and price versus performance. So he didn't have a Rolly. He had a Yashica 124. Right. He didn't have the Nikors at the time. He worked with the Minolta system, and which they're all amazing, but less than half as much money. And so he had this, in addition to these other cameras, which I wasn't going to like. I tried picking up the Yashica and I was like, what the heck is this? But so my father died when I was 8. So, I remember him and actually my mother was sort of became the documentarian of the family. Like people made fun of her all the time because she would, like, it would be somebody's birthday or something and she would take 2 rolls of film, right? Or like even at just random family events. They're like, what are you doing with all these photos? You take like a roll of film every week. How can you, like 36 photos a week? Who could deal with that many photos? And so and those were all just on, a little disposable-ish cameras. But, so I grew up with the idea that these events are things to document. But then, so my father died when I was 8, so I didn't really interact with those cameras in that way then. But I was always very interested in things that honored him in any way. And so when I got a little bit older in high school, 15, 16, and came across these cameras, he had especially at a Minolta SRT 101B. People want to Google that, an entirely like manual everything. I think you can take out the batteries and still shoot, and you can bash it against a rock, which I did a couple times. And I was just really, really deeply interested in it. Only then just shot at your normal like high school photography class level, which is like, here's a picture of a basketball hoop. Here's a picture of my friends. Here's a picture of my foot, whatever, just, learning. But again, with a camera that you had, I don't even know if the exposure meter was working anymore. So I had to learn, all of those things and to at least a basic level. And because, then we would all, shot black and white and develop film. So you get to see, exactly how much you've overexposed, underexposed, things like that. And so that was just a little taste. I can't say that I went from there straight into like photographing every day of my life. Then I went to college, and I was primarily my real path into it professionally was initially as a writer. I sort of grew into being a journalist. I became the editor-in-chief of my college newspaper, which meant that while going to college, I was working about 60 to 80 hours a week, wow. Unpaid, in a labor of love or insanity. And we started to, I took a couple photos for them, but I was the editor-in-chief. I was primarily a writer. But I do remember I did a couple assignments on a digital camera, which back then was just undescribably terrible. You wouldn't you wouldn't photograph like a GIF you put in a chat message now about it with those kind of cameras. But I came out of there. I came out of college completely shell shocked, didn't know what to do. I graduated on May 20th. I defended my final thesis. I finished my thesis basically on May 19th. So I hadn't even had a second to look for a job or figure out what was happening with my life. So I sort of retreated back to my home, started looking, started thinking. And what I had was all of this journalistic experience and drive, and the chutzpah that comes with it. And so I applied to my local paper, even though there wasn't a job. There was no position. Right. But I said, here I am. Here's what I can do. And it wasn't long before I got a job there. And what was nice about, because I had also heard I went to school in New York City, and so I had heard about Newsweek, New York Times, what the experience is there. And I knew that, I love these institutions, but I'd be getting coffee for 15 years before I had a byline. Right. And at this tiny little local paper, I had my first job was not even writing, but I had it for exactly 9 days before I was promoted to city editor. And, I started writing and designing. You kind of do everything. In addition to writing and doing the pages, it started being like, okay, there's things going on. There's assignments. We need people to photograph them. And I was like, okay, I kind of know how to look at photos and see what a good photo is. I will give this a try. And one of the things that kind of shaped me is about this time. I also had access to the AP photo wire, and this is back in 2000, where having constant access to really good journalistic photos of the day was pretty, especially in large resolution, was pretty unheard of. There was no big picture. There was no New York Times photo feed, but I had everything coming in off the wire, and I would spend like an hour each morning just looking at these photos. And it was sort of framed, started to create like a visual library, a sense of what in this form of photography at least was the kind of thing that was considered to be a good photo, right? Like that's right. Where our some of our aesthetic comes from very basic things of like what makes a person more or less attractive, but a lot of it just comes from the millions of other photos that we've seen create a sense in us of like what a good photo is or looks like in a certain context. And so I started taking in, just a lot of this photojournalism coming in off the wire. But then, like I said, very, very quickly, I hit a couple really lucky breaks for someone so early in their career. I was still maybe 3 months out of college when when President Clinton came to, and his family, including then candidate for Senator Hillary Clinton, came to our town, first to vacation, but also to campaign somewhat for her race for Senate. And I somehow, like, because I was the editor, they were like, okay, you're also going to be, pool photographer for all the local papers for the for the president. And I was like, great. How do I use this camera? That had the now I'm presented with the newspaper's camera and selection of lenses and all those things, which all I'd ever had was just this old little manual camera and like a 58 millimeter. And it's like, so first, and I also had this tiny little Sony Cybershot that shot literally, I think like 640 by 480. Maybe it was like, it's like you could like go all the way up to 1024 and it shot to a floppy disk. And so on the way to some of these shoots, on the way to the first shoot, I was literally like spending the ride to the shoot to photograph the president, trying to figure out how to turn the camera on.
Oh my God.
And, and so what really shows is that there's a bunch of other soft skills that really matter in photography, and I had none of the basic skills that we all focus on that we think is the be all and end all. Often the technical skills, I know everything about my camera, but a lot of these soft skills came from me being a writer and reporter. So. So especially just like chutzpah, tenacity. So I actually ended up with so little knowledge winning a play. I can't remember. I can't remember if we came in first or second or anything, but a statewide award for photography coverage because with this tiny little camera that had maybe like a fixed like 50 millimeter or something on it. I used the fact that it was tiny and inconspicuous to basically sneak my way into a rally, and whereas all the AP shooters were like 1,000 feet away, I was like 6 feet away from the president's family, just shooting, getting like, evil-eyed by the Secret Service and things like that. But, was good enough for newsprint, and it just came out well, and we got an award for it, and I was like, oh, this is really fun, this is really cool. And so I started just basically assigning myself assignments, and as the editor, and was able to learn a lot of like just things on the ground, and learning from, first of all, those kind of like old school newspaper editors which one of the things that most wedding photographers never have the experience of is shooting for people who are not predisposed to like your photos, because they're not of like them or people they love, but to shoot for a professional whose job basically is to chew you out, or to be at an art school where their job is to criticize you as well and make you better. And I passed through both of those. I also had like a little stint at International Center for Photography, and people, if you came in and like if your shots were a little tilted, they would like swear at you and be like, "Were you drunk when you took these?" And make people like want to go off and cry. But it is a valuable part of the lesson, and so I started shooting sports and all kinds of different things, just because I even like indoor sports, like I even shot figure skating, even though I wasn't super interested in it. I was interested in it was really very technical in a different way, and just having more and more fun with it, and being able to use the Nikon wasn't long after the Clinton assignment that we got in our first DSLR, the Nikon D1. then the D1H, and closed the dark room in I think 2000, maybe early 2001. We closed our dark room, no more film, and people were like, "Oh my God, this is insane! How can you guys go digital only?" And but it was just a huge revelation for me. I've always been that instant gratification kind of person, and all the things that we know now about how much more rapidly you can improve when you see the results, the things that kind of are second nature to us, was just amazing to me. And so the story gets a lot longer, but we can go. Those were my very basic and initial foundations.
I mean, you also photograph. I mean, I think the Clintons aren't the only people of influence that you photographed. How is it photographing people that have that kind of aura and that kind of presence in terms of, I mean, you seem like someone that's happy to say yes to an assignment and then figure out how to do it in the time before the assignment. But are you someone that's kind of intimidated by those strong personalities?
Yes. So first of all, what's funny is I definitely do believe in saying yes to assignments, and as recently as I think 2 days ago, I was given I was presented with an assignment that was highly technical, all about using an 8K 360 degree camera. So it was more, in the end, it was more like a camera operator position than a photography position. And I didn't have the equipment. I've never used the equipment. I'm not a 360 degree Google Maps shooter, but I was like, sure, it'll be fun to learn something new. So there's always something new, and I always want to say yes to it and then learn. And even now, but back to the main question, it is, I think, I have been, my luck has continued to pace from there. I mean, one of the things that we still do is, I have been basically the photographer, the only non-campaign or official photographer, official White House, Pete Souza, White House staff photographer, who photographs the presidential candidates the last time they meet before the election. And I've done that since 2008. So Obama and McCain, Obama and Romney. I also had then photographed Bush for the same newspaper way back when. But and Trump and Hillary, and we are slated to photograph Trump and Biden later this year, and it's which has all kinds of new, technically interesting things, because, with Trump and Hillary, it was how do you get them together without them metaphorically killing each other? But with Trump and Biden this year, it's how do you get them together without them literally killing each other, and without everyone else in the room? How can you, how can you even have this massive, extremely important indoor event with people who's, it's extremely important that they not come down with coronavirus right before the election. So there's a lot of things going on with that, but it's I think, what's really interesting, other than, especially when I first met Bill Clinton, and it was, a 20-year-old, and was just, he's got that electric personality. The people in general who have intimidated me most are a lot of the brilliant scientists that I've been able to photograph, both through some of the institutions that I work with. So I photographed I was a lot of Nobel Prize winners and Jane Goodall and these people who have changed sort of the intellectual and scientific world behind them. And that's always intimidating. But my very, very first freelance assignment, after another part of my career, we can skip over where I was a shooter for universities. My very first freelance assignment was as a week-long artist in residence at a sort of a Nobel Prize winning laboratory, which was the residence of James Watson from Watson and Crick. And
wow.
Since then, everyone now knows that he's this crazy old kook. because he's done a lot of things since then that got in the news for like racism and misogyny and all things like that. But I hadn't. But he's also brilliant, of course. But we didn't know that walking in, and so here I am, my very very first freelance assignment, and still in my 20s, and just this kid coming in. And my job is to photograph, this person. He won a Nobel Prize for work he did when he was like 24, and with the double helix and the DNA. And I walk in, and I'm like, okay, Mr. Watson, nice to meet you. I'm here to photograph you. And he's like, I have plenty of photographs of me. Why don't we go? You know what I'd really like is photographs of the trees in my yard. And he goes from there. And I have to say, but I'm really here. I'm actually supposed to photograph you, and we're actually doing we're presenting a gallery of. The part of this assignment was that there would be an art gallery of my work, of portraits of these people and the grounds, things like that. It was pretty important to actually be able to photograph this man for a gallery that people would come to and watch and view the photos. And there might be questions if I only had photos of his trees, and so. It's really, really, really about the soft skills, learning the soft skills of like being able to deal with people, to open them up, and to kind of sometimes figure your way out of these impossible situations.
Right.
That is, and those are the things that are much, much, much harder to learn, especially now, where cameras do literally everything for you. That's much harder to learn than like f-stops and what shutter speed will freeze action and things like that. So that's what takes the bulk of the career.
Well, yeah, I mean, something that I struggle with when I first started was how to deal with a difficult interpersonal relationship with someone that you had to photograph. And the way that I taught myself to deal with that was to offset what wasn't working in terms of us getting on with focusing myself on the technical aspects of the photography, because then I could stay sort of creatively free without feeling completely crushed as a person by the fact that we weren't getting along. Is that something that you do in terms of, if you're just not getting on with someone, if it's just not clicking, do you switch over and focus on the actual photo and the camera itself?
Yeah. So the first thing that I do in that situation is I really, really figure out how I can repair this relationship. And that's now. So again, you got me thinking of way back when I started out, I learned all the technical, very early is easy. I'm a technical person. And the only thing that I had going for me is I was able to realize that wasn't it. That wasn't the be all and end all, because I had also gone to art school and I had met people who didn't literally would come to me and say, I got this thing, it's called a flash. I don't know how to turn it on, but we're producing brilliant, emotional, cutting work, even though they had no technical skill whatsoever. And right. so I realized that was really crucially important. And with the work that we do, where one of the things I like about it is that the person who's hired you and the subject are the same person, or their goals are aligned, which can be very, very different than like editorial photography. So that relationship is everything, because if they like you, they will like the photos. They're almost guaranteed to like the photos if they really love you as a person. Whereas if they have decided for whatever reason that they hate you, it does not matter how award-winning, how you can win literally the #1 worldwide award for your photos of that wedding, and they will hate those photos. And I've seen this. I've seen this with experiences of other photographers. I've seen that to some extent, with some clients, so it is on that level. It is extremely crucial, but also for me, when I'm looking at my work and also when I'm looking at the work of others, it does not matter when you're talking about weddings and this type of photography. It doesn't matter anything that's happening in the rest of the photo, how beautiful the landscape is, what kind of crazy techniques they've used in the lightings or a panorama or whatever. The photo is a failure if I can see that the couple looks uncomfortable. Right. And doesn't look like in the moment, emotional, because that's the point. That emotional resonance is everything for what we do. And so body language expression, that's in any wedding portrait and anything, generally in any portrait, like they have to have the kind of emotion, even if it's relatively blank or whatever, but they have to have the kind of emotion that you want for your work and what you're going for, because what you're doing is photographing people. So it's like, I think back to the movie Almost Famous. It's like, I look for the person who's not getting off and I make them get off. Like, you want to find you want to find the person who you're not clicking with, and you want to say, what can I find? And part of that is finding in yourself. And this is a related and also big challenge, is often to say, okay, what can I find that I really like or love or understand or appreciate about this person? So taking the relationship the other way first, because often, first of all, sometimes people are just assholes, right? Like, and if not, even if they're not we have a much, I think, because it's a self-selecting group, right? Like our ratio of people who have hired us who are assholes is just vanishingly smaller than, I would say, the percentage of the general population. We work with really amazing people because it's a self-selecting group. These are the kind of people who come to us. But the kind of work that we present that isn't like just all about me and how fabulous I am, but is about families and about the fun that people have. But there's there's a bunch of people at weddings that haven't hired you, and they're also often in really they're super stressed out. Maybe like they've been screaming at each other, and so like, even if people aren't inherently like that, it can bring out people's inner asshole. And so the first step is to say, okay, what do I sympathize with, empathize with, and in this person, what are the things that I find that I can like, or ideally even like love about this person just for this day and to understand. And so, for example, I think one of the things that took me longest to really get, because, I'm not in a position to naturally sympathize with, was, mothers of the bride who were snappy, super stressed, super high strung. They get snappy. I have stories that I could just tell you, and we would say, ha ha ha, that person is insane for the things that they said. But if you just leave it there and you're like, well, sometimes mothers of the bride are insane and that's just how it works, then you've really kind of missed something in your empathy with humanity, and you've missed something, and therefore you've missed something in the way in which you can service them and relate to them for something that's all about empathy and delivering photos that should make them happy. And so, I would sat down and I recognized this from one wedding, that I remember saying, okay, where is this unhappiness coming from? And I realized that a lot of times, at least in American weddings, so and Western, the mother of the bride may have put more work and certainly more emotion and thought and history into this wedding day than any other person, including the bride, including the couple. And then on the wedding day, there's nothing for them. There's nothing for the mother of the bride on most wedding ceremonies. If they're not involved in like the getting ready and the putting the bracelet on, which isn't, technically part of the wedding at all, then there is, again, by default, there is no mother-daughter dance. There is no, she's not walking her down the aisle. So it is, if you're not careful, it is very easy to, first of all, for you to have the mother of the bride super undercovered because there's nothing going on, but also like it's very easy for them throughout the day for the mother and the daughter to like not interact together in any way if they're not really thinking about it. And that creates, this real like emotional discontent. And that then leads to like, if they're not interacting together, then you're not going to be really photographing that, unless you're very, very intentional about it. And I realized, this is like real. This is, I can see where somebody would have this deep emotional discontent that is not even primarily about me or photography or anything, but it bleeds out into that. And now that I empathize with that, and now that I understand that, now I can work with that. And not only can I make my photography better for this person, but I can help, even like heal this relationship and make this person happier, even on the wedding day itself, just by being the person who realizes that, recognizes that, helps deal with it in some ways in the planning process before the wedding day. Everything from just saying like, hey, what role is your mother going to play with this? Or, certainly every time in like family lists, saying, okay, as we do a family list, by the way, you really should absolutely check with your parents and, their stakeholders too. And what are the things, what is everything that we can do so that the next day, no one unnecessarily says, I'm unhappy because this photograph wasn't taken. And so we want to know all those things. And it's not something that we do grudgingly. A lot of photographers are like, okay, family photos. Okay. If we, whatever it is, even if it's like a table shot or something, we say, okay, we want to make sure that you're achieving your actual goals. So maybe we're not going to photograph 30 tables if it's just something, if 25 of these tables don't care and you don't care and they'd rather be on the dance floor once upon a time before coronavirus. And, but like for those 5 tables, maybe the parents' work friends and the mom's friends who she's known for 40 years. And it's so important to them to have this photo together. Like, we want to do it. We want to do it well, which probably means, and we take a certain kind of joy in it. Because we have learned one of the biggest things, and one of the reasons that we still love weddings every time, 800 plus weddings for me later, is that we take joy in doing anything well, right? Like in knowing at any moment that you're good at something. And so to say like, okay, how can I charm these people, get them away from the table for a second, make sure that they're having this good experience. It takes 2 minutes, whatever, and you're doing something that is really valuable for them in that moment, even though it's artistically nothing. It will win no awards. No one will, you wouldn't show it on a blog, and, whatever it is, but you're doing something that, that has incredible value in its own way. And there's time to do all of these different things. So, yeah, that really is, sort of a long answer to sort of our journey through these things is, it extrapolates from there, because that was my hardest relationship to understand, because I have not ever been a mother of the bride. But, having been, through all of this, having been married, having, knowing about, just having been a young person, having, and like to think, again, I'm still not that far off. Having dealt with, all of the anticipation and all, things like that, those are easier to sympathize with. And yeah, so that's just one illustrative relationship that we had to come to understanding after many years of not. I don't think this finally clicked for me until 2013. I'd already been full time photographing weddings for more than 5 years before it really clicked for me.
I mean, earlier on, you mentioned emotional resonance being a big part of being a wedding photographer in general. Is that something that led you down the path of shooting weddings, was kind of chasing something that carried more emotional weight in terms of photography?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Because, before weddings, again, I came from photojournalism. And in the meantime, I had done a lot of other kinds of photography. I had worked with Columbia University, as a photographer, and did a lot of corporate work. I realized that there was value in in kind of zigging where other people zag, even professionally, and so these days especially, it's like there's a lot of people in their 20s who get into wedding photography, portrait photography, concert photography, things like that. There are not so many 20-somethings like I was who learned to shoot an entire annual report.
Right,
And
right.
so those are things that I was doing before. But I always loved weddings. I have a big boisterous family. But the things that usually when people say they love weddings, they're like, well, I love wedding dresses. I love, I have a trapper keeper. I love the prettiness. I love that's usually what you think of when somebody says like, I love weddings. But, I have this crazy boisterous Irish family who still 800 weddings later, there are things that I've only seen happen at my own family weddings. And it was just such an amazing emotional experience to hang out with these people and see the craziness. Again, my aunt's wedding, we sent 3 of my family members in separate incidents to the hospital with
Oh my
injuries, not
goodness.
like alcohol poisoning. So it gets really crazy, and that is amazing. And I have all of these, 35 years later, because a lot of these were when I was a little kid. I still have these really valuable memories, and that was what I loved. And so that was immediately what I focused on. And I said, so I was like, I knew that weddings were amazing, but in that certain way, and that was always what I was interested in. And I had just said, like, to be able to take some of these skills and create something that I know is meaningful. That I know that like every time I show up to work, I'm doing something that people will still think about 40, 50 years later. That's just absolutely incredible. And so that took me, I just instantly had a drive for that and a love for that. I mean, the first time you take photos and people see them and they start crying, you're like, oh my God, like this can this doesn't happen in other jobs. You don't you don't present a TPS report to somebody and they become so overladen with joy and that they just burst into tears. And there's so much that's brought in this. I mean, I've even had a couple times I've had people like tear up at photos of other people's weddings, just like during the client meeting, and I'm like, oh my God, this is incredible. I'm hired, I can tell, but what an amazing thing. And I was able, again, what's so interesting about the industry, the way it went through technological revolutions and things, and the way so much has changed, is that in a way, anyone has been feeling old for a long time, right? Like
Yeah.
I feel like I'd been in the job like a year when I was already like, I feel old, It's like I saw a story or something a month ago where some 17-year-old was talking about how TikTok made her feel old, right? And it's a little like that. If you've been in the industry more than 2 years, like things have changed, and you feel like what the kinds of changes that a generation ago would have taken decades, right? And so,
Yeah.
and people have been. I now do feel I have enough experience that I have genuine expertise, but people have been ascribing expertise to me since long before I had it. And so,
Right.
yeah, you do like like I know that there, I feel like a great grandfather in ways because I know that there are people who are wedding photographers now because they were inspired by the person who was inspired by the person who was inspired by the person who was inspired by me, even though, again, I've only been shooting for like 15, 16 years, which is, not like, that's not an unheard of thing. So it's just been going at a, such an incredibly fast pace. And I lost the thread in pursuit of some funny ideas there. But
well, if I could track back to something you said near the beginning, which was about your mum being the documentarian of the family or taking on that role. And then you mentioned sort of trying to empathize with people on the wedding day so that you can find a common ground and hopefully like or love them, as you put it. Does being the subject of your mum's many, 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 many photos put you in a good position to empathize with people that aren't used to being in front of the camera when you're photographing them?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's what it does in a certain way because she was a documentarian, right? And again, in a very, very simple way, the kinds of things that we don't even think about now. It's just like, oh, it's a birthday party. I'm just going to grab some shots with my iPhone. So I wasn't like sitting for portraits a lot as a kid, and I wasn't. We weren't doing it for the gram. But I could see the value of all of these things, and one of my early memories that brings home how much value wedding photos have, for decades is I remember being a very little child, maybe 4 or 5, and looking at my parents' wedding album and being enraged that I wasn't in any of the photos. Like, how could they have this big event and like, where are the photos of me? And they're like, well, there was a time before you were born and things happen. And so, so it is like it's a really important part of family history. But since we're spending so much time on early career, one of the things, and I've mentioned glancingly that is valuable to have the professional training of people who want a certain kind of thing from you. But I also went through some of the art school world where they want a very different kind of thing. And so to see your clients want one thing, a newspaper editor, an art director wants a certain different kind of thing, and art school wants a third kind of thing, and you see how much audiences matter. And so one of the first things that happened when I was at ICP in this documentation class was this. So there were 2 assignments that were just brilliant instructional assignments, and these are the first 2 weeks of school of this class, and so the first one I just moved past, but this one I think everyone should do. If you're a photographer and you're listening, try and do this for yourself. If you won't, don't get put to the police. But it was find a person on the street and take a photograph of them. And take a portrait of them. Obviously, they know it. And so, okay, this sounds normal. This sounds like, but the entire assignment was find a person on the street that you've never met before and take a photograph of them inside their house.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. So so all of a sudden you have to overcome things in yourself. You have to learn how to build trust in others. You have to learn how you've gone from something that was like pretty normal, like, okay, yeah, I can do that. I can walk up to somebody and explain my situation and give them a photograph. But like, how do you get to that next level, which is a huge jump? But then the second week's assignment, which gets actually to the question, was, then he sat down and he said, okay, so now all you people who have just met each other, and specifically I'll pair you off in like boy, girl, where there might be some kind of tension. Your assignment for next week is I want you guys to come back and photo with portraits of each other. Again, great. Easy. Second part, nude portraits.
Oh
And
God.
this is a class on storytelling and documentation. And, it wasn't like, a fine art class. And so for him to say like, not only, okay, A, you're going to photograph this person across from you in the nude. B, they're going to photograph you. C, then we are going to put up all these photos on the wall and we're going to discuss them. And so first of all, like, you loses about 25% of the class before before the next class shows up. But what an amazingly incredible experience in learning about vulnerability and how to overcome that than to be photographed, to at the same time learn to approach somebody who is in this unexpected, uncomfortable situation, and then to be in that situation yourself, and to learn to be a subject. Because I photograph a lot of photographers because my work is known by a lot of photographers, and so we do a lot of photographers' weddings and or people come in for portraits, and photographers are often like the most pathologically camera shy people that there are. And so they often have just the hardest shells to crack through. And because very, very few of them have been in these kinds of experiences, especially if you're going to be, the people who are photographed nude tend to be people who are very comfortable, like being nude in front of other people, or like, again, doing it for the gram or whatever. So to break through, to not be that kind of person, but to have to break through simply because you want to learn more about vulnerability and the human experience and things like that these are just two of the most brilliant assignments that for learning about the human experience within the span of like 8 days. And I really, really, really got a lot from that. So I have been, there are, this is all a long way of saying that there are technically nudes of me floating around. But yeah, no, I mean, that those kinds of things, I do think photographers, especially if you are the kind of person who does not, the more that you do not like being photographed, the more that you should be photographed. And you should be photographed in exactly the type of setting that you were photographing other people. So when we started doing family photography, one of the most important things when you do family photography is to have yourself and your family and whatever that is photographed in the very same way, in the very same system. It's crucially important. I don't think we really understood family photography to a certain level until we were photographed. The same way I always said, like, again, 90% of the empathy, I feel like every wedding photographer should just get married, should just like have a practice wedding. I was married young, and it didn't work out, and that's fine. She's fine. We just weren't the right person for each other. So I was married once before Tatiana, and but the marriage didn't work out. But oh my God, I learned so much about weddings and also in the process, and what it was like to deal with a wedding photographer, and what was important and what wasn't, and the things that you should watch out for, because my wedding photographer, I'm sure, is not, it would be very hard to find her. She's long gone from the business. But was someone I regarded as a brilliant photographer at the time. But then I learned that she was like insane. And that we learned on the way up to the wedding that she had a long list of disappointing clients who literally didn't have their wedding photos. And which is, these are things that are super important. So I said on the wedding day, I was like, okay, this is really great. By the way, before you leave the premises, I need to download your cards because I know that you've got things going on, and you have a bunch of clients who've never seen any wedding photos. But you learn so much about just being on the other side. So it's like, it's obviously facetious, but it also it gets to that sense of, you probably probably shouldn't all actually get married just to learn what it's like, but it would really help if you did. So what you do then is to say, well, okay, I should be, if I have a partner, we should be photographed, like it's an engagement session, and maybe with a few different photographers to understand, different styles and different styles of working with clients. And if I don't, even I'm not in a relationship, I should still be photographed by different people to learn that, or just whatever you can do, because that will help you bridge the gap a great deal.
No, I completely agree. I actually, I found my way into photography because of the terrible experience I had with my wedding photographer. So I'm definitely there with you.
That's a common story.
Yeah, it's kind of strange, right? You'd think it would be like you were so inspired by your wedding photographer, but it's actually the other way around, it seems to be. I first came across you in a sort of long form interview / behind the scenes shoot that you did for a YouTube channel called The Frame Network. And there was some absolute pearls in there in terms of quotes that if I can just read a couple of my favorites, and then I will get to a question, I promise. The first one that you pretty much started the interview with was that you don't believe in having secrets as a photographer, and that you should be dependent on something like hard work and the honesty and sort of almost the personality of your work, as opposed to having some kind of, and for want of a better word, it's the word I would use, but having some kind of gimmick that you hide from other people so that you're the only one that can do it. Because as soon as someone finds that, you're kind of, as we would say in England, you're caught with your trousers down, I guess. I thought that was fascinating because it's an industry entirely built on people trying to sell you the snake oil that's going to solve all your problems. The next quote that I absolutely loved, my favorite quote of yours was, anything outside the frame doesn't exist. And that's been really pivotal for me in photographing weddings, that there were perhaps angles that were great, but a lot of angles that weren't, in terms of you had to be very selective with your framing to get the most out of the venue, is probably the most conservative way that I can say it. And I think that's a really interesting quote. But it's going to lead me on to my next question. My favorite quote of the whole thing was a sarcastic quote that you made, which was, "Hey buddy, I've got a method." And I pretty much owe my career to learning the Brenizer method in its entirety. It's pretty much, I pretty much owe my career to it. I'm definitely that guy with the gimmick, and unfortunately it's definitely your thing. So for those that don't know, what is the Brenizer method and how did it come about?
So let's see if I can speed run through that story. So basically the Brenizer method, 12 years ago, 12 years ago, I was trying to work through a problem. I said, again, I was a very technical photographer even before I was, an emotional photographer and a math person. And so I was working through it. I was like, what I really want is, I have a scene that I want to photograph, and I want a shallow depth of field. I actually had a 70-200 on me at the time, and which is rare for just personal travels. But I was like, what I want is the depth of field of this lens at 200. But I want the frame of it at like 70 or even 50. I want to really photograph the scene, but I want it in kind of that more like large formatty, kind of wider angle, but three-dimensional look. And it just clicked in my head that I was like, wait, why not? I was on a travel, so I've been doing panoramas all day, and so to get straight to the answer, basically most panoramas, especially historically, have been about resolution or just achieving something that is impossibly wide. And again, like the entire photography landscape has changed 6 times over since 2008. But especially then, it's about like, making a high resolution photo with a 12 megapixel camera back then, and so this was not that at all. I didn't need resolution, but what I needed basically was to turn my camera into a large format camera. So the reason that with a medium format camera or a large format camera, or just the difference between your DSLR and your cell phone, and the reason that you can, naturally without software, get a deep depth of field or a shallow depth of field, and a lot of blur and 3D effects with your DSLR, is that the sensor is larger, and so an actual 35 millimeter lens on like a cell phone would be just an unbelievable telephoto. Like you could photograph a crater on the moon, but that's, and so what you're really photographing with on a cell phone is like often a 3 millimeter lens. And those have, basically infinite depth of field. And so to say, okay, whereas there is a very, very shallow depth of field at like a 200 millimeter on a 2.8. And to say, okay, I want this kind of very shallow depth of field, but I want it to not be a super telephoto photo. It should work to just do a giant panorama of this. This should mathematically all come out okay. If I turn a 200 millimeter photo at 2.8 into something that is kind of just like a 100 millimeter photo, it should work out that this looks like, in a very basic sense, I should get all of this 3D effect. Mathematically, the way it works out is I should get like a 100 millimeter f1.4 effect, because basically the math is just the reverse of a teleconverter. So if you put on a 2 times teleconverter, an imaginary 100 millimeter f1.4 would become a 200 millimeter 2.8. And so I was like, if I just do panoramas, I can basically make the effects of lenses that are either impossible or that you'd have to wheel around in a wheelbarrow. And so I just tried a bunch of it, and I was like, I took it home that night and crossed all my fingers. I was like, oh my God, I hope this works. And they worked great and beautifully, like beyond my wildest dreams, just, right away. And so I first jumped right into it. Like when I look back, the first week of it, I'm proud. What I'm then proud of is that next week, like it clicked for me, and I got, in a way, got lucky or used the prior conditions well at that moment. But I'm proud of that. In the next week, I did things that even are kind of rare for people today. Is, I while I was still on vacation, I said, okay, I've got this thing. And so, first of all, I want to go out and see if this is just a thing that like people do. And I just hadn't run across it before. Like there's so many people photographing. So even then, there's infinite people photographing infinite things. But even then I'm like, there's so many people photographing so many things. This must be a thing that I just haven't discovered. And so I put it out to my social network at the time, and a bunch of other photographers. I was like, do you understand what's happening here? Have you seen this before? And they were like, no, I have no idea what you're doing. So it's like, okay, maybe I'm onto something. And, but then I said, okay, well, so how do I do this with lighting? How do I do that? Okay. How I can use continuous lighting. How do I do this with flash? And how do I do this of candid scenes? How can I take because I shoot people, this is obviously easiest to do with stationary objects. I said, okay, how can I shoot people with this like on day one? And then, in day two, I was like, how can I shoot action scenes with this? And that was all, in the first week. And so by the time I wanted to share it with people, I wanted to share it immediately, but I wanted to just like figure all this stuff out. And so it was like 2 weeks later that I shared exactly what was going on and what I did, because like you said, there's no point in keeping secrets. And there are no secret, which is good, because there's no secrets left anymore. There's just tutorials. And but it was that work that I'm almost more proud of not just like sitting on the laurels, but saying, okay, there is this technique. How do I do interesting things with it and make good photos with it? So I never really, I very rarely like talk about this with clients or bring it up in client meetings unless it's somehow relevant, because first of all, like having done this thing 12 years ago, like, anything like, it doesn't matter to somebody on their wedding day. But second of all, like no technique, no matter what you're capable of matters, unless it makes a good photo. So you can, there are things that are technically harder. You can say like, well, I can light a 50 feet piece of seamless to within a variance of 1/8 of a stop, and that's technically amazing. But it has no value unless you use it to somehow create a great photo. Right. And so the same thing here is if you're it's valuable to you and to test and practice, and it's fun. But for clients and for people and for creating art, it's only valuable if you create a good photo, and if there was a reason to use it, and if it genuinely enhanced the photo. And so it is actually more valuable for me to not talk about it or tell clients about it, so that I knew it was working if the clients didn't know what was going on, but still said, oh my God, this is one of my favorite photos. I love this photo. But it wasn't, I love this photo because it was a panorama. It was just, I love this photo because it speaks to me. And the incredibly shallow depth of field somehow added to that. But the photo was successful on its own terms. And one of the things that continues to be a challenge with that is that it requires a lot of pre-visualization, because you're photographing a scene, but you're often maybe you're photographing it in 70 different photos, and no individual photo looks like the final output. And so you really have to pre-visualize the kind of scene that you're photographing. And there is a real cognitive bias to just having the subjects in the middle and photographing around, and which is not the way that you would frame every photo that you ever take, but it's very easy to photograph every Brenizer method image that you ever take that way, and that's something it's very easy for everyone, including ourselves. So you want to start from, okay, what do I want to do here to make this into an interesting photo? And just having the shallow depth of field isn't enough. And I'm again talking about secrets and versus working hard and trying to create interesting images. I'm glad that we've had that approach, because of course now you can, to some extent, approximate it all entirely in software, right? So if the depth of field was the only thing working for a photo, you can get 80% of the way there now with somebody's cell phone. And so, so you always want to make sure that that you're walking out with a photo that is great, and that every choice you made, including whether or not to use this technique, was the right choice.
Amazing. Honestly, it's I can't overstate it enough, the amount that it's done for me as a photographer. If it's okay with you, I'd love to ask you a couple of sort of quick fire, either or questions to just kind of catch you cold. So the first one, shooting varied genres for a developing photographer, good or bad?
Oh, good. I mean, wedding photography is like 100 genres, and in and of itself. So you are shooting various genres, whether you want to or not.
Telling comprehensive stories versus a single shot narrative, which do you prefer?
I have always preferred telling comprehensive stories, which puts me a little bit out of step with like the age of Instagram. But I prefer blog posts to individual images by and large.
Bad light or difficult people?
Bad light. I mean, if you're talking about what's easier, bad light is 1,000 times easier.
And my last one, technical ability or persistence, which is better?
Persistence. You will because technical ability comes, it's one of the easiest things to come. So persistence, I mean, there's a quote from Calvin Coolidge, and I'm going to mingle a little bit because I'm going from memory, that I love. Calvin Coolidge was a U.S. president who almost never said anything. He was known as Silent Cal. So this is probably the longest quote that's ever from him. And he said, basically, talent doesn't matter. The world is filled with, derelict, talented people and people who have excellent education. Talent and genius and giftedness doesn't matter at all. The only thing that matters is persistence. And so, because that's what will take you through all the things that you need to learn. So if you say, maybe there is something technical that is difficult for you, and say like, man, I really just can't get lighting down. It's really, it's really hard for me to work these ratios and things like that. But if you have persistence, you will learn that, absolutely. But things that are more common, like, boy, I'm just not used to interacting with people in this way, and maybe I'm a natural introvert, or maybe I'm just naturally uncomfortable around people. What does it take to get there? And there are ways to do that, but the thing that they will take is persistence. And then, especially when you're dealing with a moment like we are now, where everything is falling apart, and maybe there's injuries to your pride, where you're like, oh my God, I had this great career 6 months ago, and now everything is gone, and maybe and no one will hire me for the rate that I was, and what do I do next? And the only thing that's going to get you through is persistence, and ability to adapt, and to say, if that doesn't work, I'm going to do this. I'm going to continue on grit. And so that goes hand in hand with throwing aside pride, with throwing aside, this feeling that the most important thing is impressing other wedding photographers instead of like working with people to produce meaningful and beautiful work that hits them at an emotional level. But if you say like, oh, I have to price at a certain level because otherwise, I'll feel bad in front of other photographers. And if that like even enters into your calculus at all, then you've gotten off track a little bit. But just saying, I have to make this work. I have to continue, because the only thing that's going to get you there is to say, I have to continue because I love this. Even when it's difficult, even when it's hard, maybe for us, especially when it's hard, we love inherently solving problems. And like, it's interesting and it's fun for us. And so this is not easy, and the coronavirus is not fun. But we have these moments of saying like, well, it is a new challenge, and so if we can solve this, we can. There's parts of it we can feel good about, and that's where persistence comes from. Because you can't just do something you hate and say and like grit your teeth and say I will be persistent, because you will burn out. You will not be persistent, and even if you are. Because your back is against the wall, you will be miserable. And that's not the way to go forward. So find the things about it that you love. Maybe shunt off the parts that you do hate to other people. There's lots of ways to do that now. And that's truly the way to have a good life and to have a good career.
And I've got a million more questions I'd love to ask, but I've obviously got to let you have your time and enjoy your real life and not listening to my horrible accent. My last question for you, how do you analyze yourself? One thing I've noticed a lot with anyone creative is they tend to fall into one of two camps with this. They're either incredibly over-complimentary to themselves and almost to the point of delusional, or they are so self-hating and so self-loathing that they're unable to see the positives in what they do. How do you as a professional especially analyze your work and analyze your progress in terms of your improvement against trends that are obviously always maneuvering around photographers? How do you analyze yourself?
Well, I think the thing that amazes people the most about me is how humble that I am. No, I'm kidding. That is something. I think it's incredibly difficult for people to analyze themselves, and people are better or worse than others about it. And I feel like through experience, I feel like I have become. I've developed tools that make me a little bit better than most at that. But the important thing is that everyone, including myself, thinks that they are better than they are at that. And so it really, really, really is important to have outside voices in this. And I have an outside voice every day because I work with my partner, Tatiana, who has, she has some similar philosophies, but also some very different philosophies. And so we kind of, and is again completely unafraid to call me out on things, and call me out on one like last night, and I'm still thinking about it. But you always, and as I mentioned before, like I was lucky to start in a place in journalism in a professional field because I had editors who had no reason to pander or cater to me. And if they didn't like something, they would very strongly tell you. And that was the job. And I had to learn, to please them. And also, and it's not just likes on an Instagram page or anything like that. It is your job to go out and produce every day. And then, working through, to art school and a very different kind of thing where, I with those kinds of people, I had there was one moment where another student said, I'm looking at your work on this project and it makes me, I hate it so much. It makes me physically ill. And wow. I did not take it well in the moment. We had other people who stormed out of class and things and critiques like that. But, and it wasn't that she wasn't, entirely necessarily right. People are never entirely right, but it was the way that she felt, and she had reasons for the way that she felt. And I had to understand that, and to understand why the same work that other people liked really, really rubbed this person the wrong way. And, I had to, but to have those voices. One of the things I was really lucky about as an early photographer is I had people around me who were not wedding photographers, but were more similar to my client base. I think it is actually incredibly valuable to get not just Instagram, but in-depth portfolio critiques from people who are not and do not want to be photographers, but are maybe a little bit more similar to the kinds of people you're photographing. So that because the things that they will call out as what they like, and the things that they will call out for what they don't like, will be something entirely different, but really, really very valuable, and helps you sort of get your head out of photography world where, for example, somebody would be like, oh my gosh, that's a Brenizer method, and you must have used so many images, so that makes it good. And whereas somebody who's not a photographer at all might just say wow, those people look really uncomfortable. And so that's actually an incredibly valuable critique. You learn in some ways almost these are the most valuable critiques for who are the people who are like your clients for wedding photography.
Again, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. What we always do at the end, and I'm not sure if it's something you'd be too excited about, but I always try to do it, is to make sure that we tell everyone listening where they can go to find your work. So where's the best place people can go to see what you do?
Well, I am loath to tout anything that is owned by Mark Zuckerberg, and I hate being tethered to him. So I would love for you to go to our actual website, which is thebrenizers.com. We are also on Facebook and Instagram as the Brenizers, but Mark Zuckerberg is a poisonous, toxic person, and everything that he touches turns to poison. So let's take it old school and go to thebrenizers.com, look through look through blog posts and long stories the way like it used to be done, and we would be really incredibly grateful.
It's been such a pleasure to talk to. I can't even sum it up. I've been a bit terrified actually. I don't think I've really slept. But it's such an honor to talk to you. Thank you so much for giving me the time.
Okay. Well, I honestly, this was such a pleasure, and thank you so much. And I was really, really happy to be on here.